Have you ever judged a book by its cover? Okay, maybe you're not a big reader, but I'm willing to bet you've judged a person before based on how they look or what they believe. I know I have. And I'm pretty sure we've all been on the receiving end of that too. It doesn't feel great to be misunderstood or written off before someone even tries to know you. That's why today's conversation mattered so much to me. When Anne, you might know her by her pen name, A.M. Geever, and I first connected on Podmatch. Neither of us knew what this conversation would turn into. We come from very different belief backgrounds, but one thing connected us right away: our shared love of writing. That connection opened the door to a really honest conversation that wove between apocalyptic fiction, faith journeys, and what it looks like to truly listen to someone you don't fully agree with. I'm genuinely grateful Anne did not follow her first instinct to decline coming on the show, because we both would have missed out on the chance to understand each other more deeply. This episode pushed me out of my comfort zone, and I hope it encourages you to step out of yours too. I'm Anna Murby, and this is Honest Christian Conversations. If this is your first time joining me, thank you for being here. And if you're returning, welcome back. If this encourages you, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave a comment or a review. You'll find the link in the show notes. Now let's get to the episode. And thank you so much for coming on to talk to me. I know that when we talked before, you were a little apprehensive, but you liked the idea of talking about differing opinions. And it is a very important thing that we see that even if we aren't eye to eye on everything, we still have connections. We still have things that we can relate to. And we should be willing to talk with people that we may differ with on other opinions. For example, I love what you write about, and that's what drew me to you, was the type of literature that you write, which is kind of apocalyptic, zombie, all that kind of stuff. I find that interesting and exciting. I just wanted to talk to you. I got to know where you are spiritually, which I also would
Mhm.
love to unpack because I know nothing about the universalist side of things. So I would really love to know more about that as well, whatever you're willing to tell me. So, yeah, let's
Sure.
just jump into it. Tell me about Anne.
Well, first off, thank you so much for having me. And I've been looking forward to this because I really appreciated the candor and that we were able to have about both of us being a little apprehensive, like this
Mhm.
person might be a little different. And I really appreciated that. And I was like, this is going to be a good conversation.
Yeah.
Ahead of time, I already knew that. Oh, so where to start? I write post-apocalyptic and disaster fiction. I got started with that because, like, I grew up in a family that really liked scary movies and
Mm.
monsters and
Mhm.
horror and that kind of thing. Zombies are obviously something like that in
Yeah.
that genre. And then growing up in Pittsburgh, Pennsylvania, this is the area where George Romero invented the modern zombie genre because
Hmm.
before Romero, zombies were a more supernatural kind of entranced kind of person out of the voodoo tradition. They didn't become what we think of when we hear of a zombie until Romero made Night of the Living Dead. He went to
I've
school
actually
here.
never seen that.
Oh, really?
No.
If you
No.
I will look for some lists because there are some older movies that
Mhm.
you can find and I think one of the best is a film called I Walked with a Zombie.
Hmm.
Uh, but there are films that, predating, Romero that have that element, and I mean, it's been decades since I've seen any of them,
Yeah.
so I don't know that any of them are good, but I know that I Walked with a Zombie is. Anyway, George Romero went to college here in Pittsburgh, and he did his filmmaking in Pittsburgh and in
Hmm.
the larger Western Pennsylvania area. Zombies have this outsized influence in Pittsburgh. When Dawn of the Dead was premiering, it premiered in Pittsburgh. My brothers were going to the Monroeville Mall where it was filmed, and that was kind of a big deal because that was a new mall on the far side of town where we never went because it was really far. It was like 30 minutes away. Um, But we just didn't go to that part of town. It had an indoor ice skating rink, and I just remember, like, they were so excited about going to see this film, and so, that also really captured my imaginations. I ended up writing my first series, The Undead Age, as a zombie series because I was very intimidated by the idea of writing a book. I
Mhm.
had wanted to write basically my whole life. A big reader. That's where my love of writing came from, and writing happened to be something that was felt natural for me. So I decided, well, I'll write a chick lit book. They can't be hard. Which is just like the pride, just the
Yeah.
absolute hubris of that statement is very embarrassing to me now. But that was what I thought. I thought, okay, I can do this kind of book. Except I don't read those kind of books very often.
Mm.
I enjoy them
Mhm.
when I do, but I don't read them a whole lot. And so my ideas were terrible. I mean, they were terrible. And I would tell my husband, "Well, what about this?" And he'd be like, that's pretty bad." Then I'd tell him the next one and he'd be like, "Oh, that's terrible." So we did this for several weeks. And one Friday evening, he had just told me how bad my latest idea was. And I was like, "Too bad it can't have zombies." And we looked at each other, we're like, "That's what I should write," because always been a huge fan of the zombie genre, and, so we banged out the plot that weekend, and then it took me almost 10 years to write the book.
Yeah.
But that was how I got started writing post-apocalyptic fiction. I love post-apocalyptic fiction. I've always liked the what's next. This thing has all been torn down, so how do we rebuild it? Because there's so many ways that can go. So that's kinda where I come from with why I write what I write. As
Mhm.
far as what I like to do with it, I write character-driven fiction.
Mhm.
Because in general, most fiction falls into either character-driven or plot-driven fiction. You have both with each, but, in some, it's the plot that's moving the story ahead, and the
Mhm.
characters are important, but the interiority of the characters isn't as big of a thing. Whereas a character-driven novel, it's really about the characters and their experience and how they get through this and how it changes them. Obviously, you have to have a compelling story
Mhm.
for people to want to read your book. So it's not like you've no element of one or the other. But I really like people. I like what happens to them. Why do they make the choices they do? How does it change them? And post-apocalyptic fiction is fun in that respect
Mhm.
because the circumstances are so extreme.
Yeah.
So, in a very extreme circumstance, you can really push and push and push and push and just make the choices so stark and so painful. And I think fundamentally I'm interested in writing. I went to seminary fundamentally because I'm really interested in people and
Mhm.
what makes people tick. And why do people behave the way they do the things they do? That's kinda shaped a lot of my pursuits and certainly my writing.
It's actually pretty interesting. I've done some writing as well. I have a few books that I've published. I'm trying to figure out which way they would go in terms of character or plot driven. I'll have to look them over and figure that out now that I know the difference. As you were talking about why you write this kind of content, it made me think of what I've heard many times before: you write what you know.
Mhm,
And it's also funny because you mentioned the hubris of, "Oh, I could write that easily, no problem." That's where I was with, "That doesn't make any sense. How can you only write what you know? What if you only know, like, one thing? How you can't stay in that
mhm.
lane. Maybe you can branch out." And it is possible, I suppose, to branch out, but you have to have good ideas like you mentioned. And I'll be honest, some of my ideas are very out there and would be good if I knew how to nail them down and, like, which genre to actually put them in.
Mhm.
So, I think as creatives, we just have so many of these amazing ideas, which could potentially be good, but maybe not us writing them, or maybe just we need to think them out more, put them in our genre. Like what you and your husband were like, "Oh, well, maybe if it had zombies." Made me think of the Pride, Prejudice, and Zombies. I haven't seen it
Right.
or read it, but that's what it made me think of is, oh, this person maybe wanted to write a really nice romantic story, but maybe that's not their wheelhouse. And like, oh, zombies. Like, that's just what I thought of when you said that. So it was very interesting, and I love how you grew up with that sort of content, is that's just what you were used to. So why could you how could you not want to write something like that? I'm pretty sure your books are absolutely amazing because you have such a heart for people. Like you said, you love knowing why they do what they do, what makes them tick. And I think that's a really good way to make character fiction actually come alive and feel relatable and actually would move the story, the plot, and give people a chance to find a character they really like. I think I
Oh,
do love that kind of genre and like the whole apocalypse thing.
well, as you were talking, I kind of hate write what you know
Mhm.
because people write fantasy, people
Yeah.
write science fiction. I grew up with all that horror and that monster movies,
Mhm.
and that's how I know it. I never thought of it that way. So, just in terms of what are your interests
Yeah.
and what do you steep yourself in, that's how you know it. So it doesn't have to be, because write what you know is so, it can
Vague.
be so literal. Well,
Yeah.
I think we take it very literally. At least I always did. And
Yeah, me too. I did.
yeah, and if you write what you know, I mean, it's very limiting. And one of the things, your imagination is where all of these, any idea for any kind of art starts. It's
Mhm.
like, what if?
Yeah.
H.G. Wells wrote The War of the Worlds, which I have never read. My husband says it's great, but
I've seen the movie.
yes, I've seen several. I've seen several versions of the
Yeah.
movie, and H.G. Wells wrote that in the early 1900s.
Mhm.
I
There's no
mean,
way he knew that.
well, it's just like monsters from outer
Yeah.
space. I mean,
Mhm.
that was just so out there. But that was somebody thinking, well, what if?
Mhm.
I think it's always really helpful if people hear other people saying it's not just what you know in lived experience. It's what you know in terms of anything you've been exposed to, and then it's your imagination. And imagination is, it's so creative. It can be so out there. I mean, there are so many authors I've read their books and I've been like, why didn't I have this idea? I wish I had this idea,
Yeah,
you
I've
know?
been there too.
Oh, yeah, absolutely. Yeah, that just really triggered that for me when you said that because I don't know. There's a lot of really bad writing advice out there.
Yeah.
The more I write, like write every day. I have a
Mhm.
friend, he writes every day, and that works for him. That's great. But that doesn't work for everybody. People tie themselves in knots trying to take that advice. So I know I've found, I've read some writing books, craft books, and I generally find there's one thing in a book that will resonate with me. I'll
Mhm.
read it and I'll be like, "Oh," or I have that like aha kind of recognition that like, "Okay, this is something that I can work with,"
Yeah.
or "This makes sense to me." I think using our inner self as a way to find those pieces of information are helpful. Now that's different than learning how to write well. I was really lucky because when I started to write my book, my friend who I didn't know wrote, had told me she was starting a writing group.
Hmm.
And I was like, "Oh, I write. I wanna be in it." I lucked out because it what turned out to be a really good group of people and, really good writers, writers who were better than me,
Mm.
which, is wonderful because you can learn so much.
Yeah.
And, like I started that group and I didn't understand the rules of point of view, and I did something that is very common with writers, which is head hopping. You
Mhm.
know, you start the scene from my point of view, and then I want to tell Anna's
Mm.
perception. And so then in the same chapter, I hop over and suddenly it's coming from Anna's point of view. And that's really confusing to a reader because, they've been reading in my point of view, and then all of a sudden it's you. And they don't always catch that, but I didn't understand that at all, and I
Yeah.
had to learn that. Even with, like, first person point of view where it's all from the character's point of view, I, in general, do not write in first person, I write in third person past.
Mhm.
I've become very good friends with, a really fantastic writer who writes post-apocalyptic fiction. Her name is Sarah Lyons Fleming. She writes zombie fiction, and if you haven't read her stuff, you really should. It's wonderful. I tell everybody to read her stuff. She writes in first person, and I wrote a short story in first person, and she was explaining, "Okay, you can't do this because it's in first person and it doesn't work," So, like, I've been at this for more than 15 years, and I'm still learning
Mhm.
from other people. I think it's important to be open to learning from other people because you won't get better. It doesn't mean you have to take everybody's advice.
Yeah.
In that writing group, I had a rule with myself because especially new writers were very protective of our work. My poor husband, we would be walking the dog, we'd be talking about my book, and he would have an idea and he would make a suggestion. And I would immediately shut him down and tell him
Mm.
why that couldn't work. And then I'd think about it, and a week later, I'd be like, that's actually a pretty good idea." I mean, the
Yeah.
poor man.
I've done that
Um,
before too. Yeah.
but, like, you have to be willing to entertain those ideas. So I had a rule with myself, which was if one person said something and it just didn't resonate at all, fine, I could ignore it. Because my group had 5 people in it, but if 2 or more people said something, I had to look at it. I
Mhm.
had to consider it, and sometimes they were right,
Yeah.
but if I had not been willing to entertain the possibility that maybe other people, knew something, my writing would never improve.
That's very good advice, actually, not just for writing, but in life in
Life.
general. We need to be willing to learn from each other and be willing to have conversations that might be difficult. Like you said, you wouldn't have grown had people not said, "Oh, you shouldn't do this," or "You can't do this," or, "Try this advice." You learn by doing things, by trying things, from getting advice from people. It always was hard for me whenever my husband would read something I wrote and he'd either correct the grammar that I missed after like 6 times of reading it through, and I was like, "How did I miss that?" And I'd get mad, or he'd give me advice, and he's very honest and I appreciate the honesty, and he'll say, "Well, this doesn't make any sense," or "I don't get this," or "This is kind of boring to me." And I have to take what he says and think about, okay, well, is he actually my target audience? No. So his
Yes.
boring comment is okay. That's for him. I get that. But why is he saying it's boring? Is it boring because it's just boring to him, or is it boring because it's boring? And then I prod him a little more, and sometimes it hurts to hear it, but like you said, you won't grow as a writer if you don't allow people to give you feedback, to talk to you, to give
Mhm,
advice from people who might be a little more successful than you. It goes for anything. With my podcasting, I have to do the same thing. I listen to a lot of podcasting podcasts and I learn things, and there's tips that they've given that I'm like, well, that just doesn't work for me. But I've heard it from so many people. This is what you have to keep doing. And I'm like, well, I think this is stupid advice. It doesn't work for me, but I might give it to somebody else and say, it may work for you. This might be
mhm,
better for you. I love that you mentioned that we just need to be willing and open to talking to people and getting advice and learning. Learning is important in life. We're not just meant to be here and stick to what we know, which goes back to what we were saying was a terrible thing, advice for writers. You shouldn't just stick to what you know, you should always want to learn more and understand more and expand yourself more. So,
mhm.
yeah, I like that you reminded us of that. So, thank you.
Well, you're welcome.
Well, you did mention a while back casually that you were in seminary. What
Mhm.
kind of seminary?
I went to a Unitarian Universalist seminary. The Unitarian Universalists are come out of the Enlightenment, the great or I'm sorry, come out of the Great Awakening here in the
Mhm,
United States in the early 1700s. The basic idea is Unitarian, one God, Universalist, universal salvation. You know,
mhm,
that I mean, those were their foundational religious system around which they understood Christianity. And then in the I think it was the late 1960s or mid 1960s, the two congregations merged. So then they became Unitarian Universalist. It's unusual in some respects. It does not have a creed.
mhm,
Um, Unifying, we all believe this. The- They frame it in terms of having a responsible search for truth and meaning.
mhm,
So that's very unusual. They're very much on the liberal progressive end of things socially, which is, where I come from in terms of my family.
mhm.
And I did not grow up in the Unitarian Universalist tradition. So, my family background was Roman Catholic, which
Is very different.
yes, yeah, well, and again, even that, my parents were very traditional Catholics.
Mhm,
They got married in the mid-1950s. My father is from Ireland. My mother is American. Her parents were from Ireland. And, so they came from a very, very traditional background. When in the late 60s, my mother decided she wanted to go to college, was exposed to feminism, started to examine, like, her life. At this point, like, she had me when she was in college, so
mhm.
she had her 8th child because there are
Oh,
9
wow.
kids in my family. That was a really social I mean, there was so much going on in the '60s and the '70s, even in the '50s with the start of the civil rights movement
Mhm,
that, people were really questioning and examining and, figuring things out and in terms of, like, just society, I mean, there was just so much going on. Well, my mother finally got to the point where she was like, I can't do much about being in this patriarchal world. Like, it's that's too big, but I don't have to participate in this patriarchal religion. So my
mhm,
mother left the church.
mm,
And, at that point, when I was about 5, so at that point, it was no longer mandatory for any of the kids because,
mhm.
she wasn't gonna make us do something that she wasn't doing and that she, quite frankly, didn't believe in anymore.
Yeah.
Whereas my dad always is still, to this day, Catholic. He goes to mass every single day. He's almost 92, so, he does it at home,
Yeah.
watching on TV. I came from this background where, there had been this really big evolution within the family, as well as looking at other options. My mother did eventually go to a Unitarian universalist. Gosh, I have trouble with R's some days. Um,
It is kind of a tongue twister, so
it is, well, they
give
say
yourself some
you.
grace.
They say to you. My mother
You.
did end up
Okay.
going to a church, and, which is how I became exposed to it. So
Okay.
anyway, very long story short, I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do with my life. I was in my early 20s. I had moved from the East Coast to San Francisco, which, really great city, or at least it was then,
Yeah.
in the early 90s, and I was trying to find a place to, like, meet friends, meet people. I thought, "Well, I'll try the UU Church," and they this young adult group, so I started going there, and that was really interesting and fun, and I met lots of interesting people, and, a lot of people who end up at UU churches, they didn't necessarily grow up in the faith tradition. They
Mhm.
come from other places. So you'll find people who grew up any number of stripes of the Christian faith. You've got people who are Jewish, you've got people who have a Buddhist angle to their spiritual practice. So I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do, and I wanted to figure out my own spiritual path. And I thought, well, why don't I go to seminary? I could figure these things out there. I could work with people. I could do something good in the world.
Mhm.
So that's what I decided to do. Going to seminary was wonderful. I went to a Unitarian seminary called Star King School for the Ministry. It was named after Thomas Starr King, who was a very, in Unitarian Universalist circles,
Mhm.
very famous minister in the 1850s and 60s. He was
Hmm.
actually very instrumental in helping keep California in the Union during the Civil War, so, like, he
Oh,
was
that's
someone who
cool.
did some interesting things,
Yeah.
and, but I was lucky because and this was in Berkeley, so I ended up moving over to Berkeley, but, Starr King was part of the Graduate Theological Union, which was a consortium of 9 different seminaries. And then and they had a common registrar. So there were 3 Catholic schools. There was us, there was an Episcopalian seminary, Baptist seminary, Presbyterian seminary, and, an interdenominational Christian seminary. We could take classes at any of these schools.
Hmm.
So I got exposed to a lot of different faith traditions, and I took my Old Testament at the Franciscan seminary. I took New Testament at the Baptist seminary. I took a pastoral counseling class at my seminary. My advisor was a Catholic nun who had taught at one of the Catholic seminaries, but they had a purge of feminists and more progressive people the year before I started. She ended up teaching at Star King. It was this very diverse, kind of rich background and a really interesting place to study. So, in the course of my studies, I realized that I just didn't wanna be a minister.
Mm.
I had gone into it with this very idealized idea
Mhm.
of what ministry was, and, and I realized I didn't wanna do it, and I by the by the end of seminary, I had decided that, like, UU was not where I wanted to be. By the
Mhm.
time I got to the end, I was like, "There's no there for me."
Yeah.
And then there were just silly things, like, I remember having a conversation with a friend of mine in the kitchen at school about how, like, "You know what? I don't like potlucks." He's like, "I don't like potlucks either." And I don't always wanna have to work on Sunday. I mean, what if I wanna have the weekend off? I mean, it was the most ridiculous conversation because it was about these little silly things.
Yeah.
So, anyway, I ended up going back to the Catholic Church, which there's a lot of people who grew up Catholic and end up in the UU church. There are not a lot who start out in UU and end up going,
And end
I
up
did the
going back.
reverse migration. Yeah, so it was really interesting. Some of my best friends to this day are people that met there, and some went
Uh-huh.
on to ministry, some didn't, some went on to become chaplains, to, obviously ministry of a different sort.
Yeah.
Um,
Yeah, my stepdad's actually a chaplain, so
oh, is
yeah.
he? Yeah,
Yeah.
I really I did a chaplaincy internship, and I really like chaplaincy. Like,
Yeah.
if I were to pursue ministry, that is what I would do.
Mm.
And I did eventually end up leaving the Catholic Church for the same reason as my mother is,
Uh-huh.
I was like, "This is so sexist. What am I doing here?" I think my there are 2 parts to my evolution as a person who is spiritual. The first is, are people basically good or bad? I
Uh-huh.
mean, that was always my question because people do so many wonderful things
Uh-huh.
and they do so many terrible things. How do you hold that in tension? And I think at this stage of my life, I've come to the conclusion that people are people and capable of a wide variety of things.
Uh-huh.
Um, it isn't this either or thing. But another thing, and I don't know if I mentioned this to you in our email conversation or not. I'm a person who wants to know and have assurances. I'm not a person who has the gift of faith. I'm
Uh-huh.
not. And I think that's part of the reason which is like something Catholics say, which I always thought was like so great and hilarious. It's like here's the reassurance for those of you who care who still wonder,
Yeah.
and I have a really hard time just, like, absolutely saying, "Yes, I'm sure." I know this is what's gonna happen when
Yeah.
when
No, I get
when I
that.
die,
Yeah.
And I think that's one of the reasons I have, struggled with the idea of, "Yeah, I know, and yeah, I can absolutely commit to this," which has me here where I am, which is pretty much agnostic. I do think there is a some kind of spiritual force in the universe. I don't really understand what it is. I'm very influenced, having grown up Catholic and in the Christian tradition, very much so. Would lean that way. But, I'm still just like, I don't know. There's
Yeah.
just this part of me that's like, I don't know. That's why I can't, make that jump to atheism because I don't know.
Yeah.
I don't know what happens, I'm not comfortable saying I do. It's not even that I like having that space for possibility and to be surprised. And as much as I think that just is part of the universe,
Uh-huh.
is that we don't know, which leaves this space for there to be, or at least I don't know, which leaves this space for discovery.
Uh-huh.
Um, so that's kind of that's kind of where I've ended up, at least at this point in my life. Because who knows, things can change.
Yeah.
And it's interesting. My brother sent me a video clip of Keanu Reeves on Stephen Colbert. And Stephen Colbert was asking like 15 questions, and by the end, we'll all know the essence of who you are. They were really silly. It was really funny, and I like Keanu Reeves. I think he's an interesting person. Colbert asked him, "What do you think happens when we die?" And he took this pretty long pause, and then he said, "I know that the people who love me will miss me." And I was so struck by that. I was like, that is something that's very true. That is something you can absolutely know, no
Yeah.
matter where you come from. I don't know. There's a big, interesting world and universe out there, and there's so much to ponder and discover and commit to or not. I think that's part of what makes people so interesting to me.
Yeah. Well, I appreciate your honesty. When it comes to having faith in something, it is really hard to put all your eggs in the basket, I guess, of something
Yeah.
and trust it. I know for a while, most of my younger years, I always wondered, am I going to heaven? I asked Jesus into my heart, but am I really going to heaven? And it wasn't until I was going through my second divorce that I finally actually felt close to God and felt like I am going to heaven because I had come back to him from straying so long doing life the way I wanted to do it, and it wasn't working. And I just really felt his presence there, if that makes any
Mhm.
sense. I just
Yeah.
felt that he loved me even though I had made mistakes, just like you do with a child. They made a mistake, you don't kick them out for it. You love them through it, and you help them through what they're going through, and that's just really what I felt in that moment of realizing that I had spit in my father's face for so long and said, "I don't like the way you're doing things, I'm gonna do it the way
Mhm.
I wanna do it," and I did, and then I had moment where I needed to cry out to my dad and say, "Dad, please help me. I can't do this without you," and he didn't reject me. He brought me to him, he loved on me, and he helped me through that situation and told me that he will always take care of me, and he hasn't stopped, and that's why I think I cling so tightly to him, is because I've actually felt what it's like to reject somebody, but still
Mhm.
have them love you through that, and I don't think I ever really felt that kind of love before, not even from my family, and it's not that I had a terrible family, it's just they didn't know how to love me in the way that I needed to unconditionally. So I always felt, was I good enough for everybody? Was I good enough for God? And I hated that feeling, so that's why I left in the first place. I just couldn't
Mhm.
handle that pressure anymore. But then when I came back and I realized it's not about me and how I felt and am I good enough, I realized I wasn't. So it was so freeing for me that I was just able to allow him to love me even when I make stupid choices, which I still do. We all have
Yeah.
our moment. Like you said, people are gonna do what they're going to do. I believe as a Christian, I believe that because of what happened in the Garden of Eden, we're all born with a sinful nature. You know, some people amp it up through life and they, continue to do awful things. And some people try really hard to do really good things and they hope that that'll get them to heaven. And according to what I believe, I don't believe that that does get you to heaven, but I'm not going to discourage people from wanting to do positive things. Depending
Mhm.
on the kind of relationship we have or what we're talking about at the moment, I might tell them that in a obviously a loving way, not like you're doing it wrong. But, I might tell them my position or something and they can do whatever they want with that. But I would never discourage someone from doing something good, even if I didn't feel that the way they were doing it was accurate to what I believe, I guess. So,
Right.
yeah, I mean, we should all be striving to do good things. And I think deep down inside, we all realize that we have this ability to do something good, which is why we do want to do something good. And we feel good after we do it. And it makes us want to do it more. It's really hard to just have faith in things. And I will be honest, there are still moments, not that I don't believe in God or that I don't believe I'm going to heaven, but I have these moments of, well, what if I'm wrong about all this? And they're very fleeting moments because I think about it in the terms of, well, I've done it the other way and that I didn't
Mhm.
enjoy at all. So I don't have any problems with the way I'm doing things now. So if I'm wrong, I guess I'm just wrong. It's not like I was like, oh no, I missed out on an opportunity to do this. You just got to figure out what you're going to do with that in that moment. Is it going to make you crumble? Is it going to keep you from pursuing life, from doing things? You just have to figure out how you're gonna handle that curiosity, I guess. So
Yeah, yeah, but I mean, that's just so profound what
mhm,
you've just shared. I don't remember the name of the person. There's a historical figure. I think he was a theologian or a philosopher, but
mhm,
basically what he said is you can't know as a person, living your limited existence, whether God is real or not. But if you live a virtuous life and a holy life and follow something, it won't hurt you, and it might bring some good into the world, you know? So it was basically
mhm,
one of these, like, there's no downside to living a good life where
yeah.
you do virtuous acts, not because you wanna get a reward per se, though, I mean, who doesn't like to get a
Yeah.
reward? Um, but, but that, there's no downside to virtue,
Yeah.
basically. And the other thing you said, which I also I absolutely agree with you, and I remember hearing this in mass one day where it was like, it's not about you. It's not about whether whether God loves you. It's not a question of whether God loves you. The door on God's side is always open, you
Mhm.
know? The question is whether you can receive it, which
Mhm.
is exactly like what you were just speaking about.
Yeah.
Uh,
Yeah. I had to make my faith my own because my whole life I grew up in a Christian home. So I knew all the stories. I knew it all in my head, but it hadn't actually reached my heart to a point where it really changed me. The only reason I accepted him into my heart when I was 12 is because I was scared into it while watching an old 70s Left Behind movie, and I didn't want to be left behind. So that's what me and my brother did, was accept him into our hearts. But there wasn't this big thing that happened of, oh, I just felt different and everything. There was
mhm.
no feelings, and then not too long after, my parents ended up getting divorced and our family split, and there was just so much emotion that went into that whole situation. And then I just started doing. I wanted to be a people pleaser, so that's what I did, is I pleased people. I did everything for them to make them love me and to enjoy being around me. I didn't know who I was. I'm still figuring that out. It was just really frustrating, and it just boiled to a head where I'm like, "Okay, I'm done with this. I'm just done with everything." I fractured completely and left it all. I was going through my second divorce. It really blindsided me, but it got me thinking in a way where I realized, if I'm going to come back to God, it has to be because I want to come to God, not because I was told this is what you should do. I was very sheltered spiritually. I only knew of Baptist Christianity, I guess, maybe Southern Baptist. I didn't even branch out into the whole, learning about deliverance or speaking in tongues, all these different things. Like, I didn't know enough about that other than this is stuff you don't touch. So I was very sheltered with all that, but when I came back to Christ, I realized I needed to figure out who God is, not who people are telling me he is. And that
Mhm.
was a profound moment for me where I realized I need to be more open to talking to people who may be different from me on things they believe, because I need to know if the God that I think I'm serving is actually the true one from what is in the Bible, or if I'm just following what someone else is telling me. I never want to be stuck in that position again. So
Mhm.
that's why I'm trying to put myself out there more, to talking with people that maybe I don't completely agree with, or I just don't understand where they're coming from, because I
Mhm.
want to be more open to understanding what they think. Perhaps we have more in common than I thought we did. So I've been trying really hard to be more aware of the fact that I just want to know who God is. I don't want people to tell me who he is. I want him to tell me who he is. So I read the Bible and I try not to read myself into it, and I try to figure out exactly what he's telling me. And if I talk to other people, I try to line it up with what the scripture says. If I have to ask questions, I'll ask questions. But I'm trying really hard not to be so judgmental and so closed-minded as I used to be. I used to be very closed-minded. Like, we would not be having this conversation even 5 years ago. That's how bad it was. I didn't wanna talk to people that may have different ideas than me, you know? It was scary for me. But
It's
I don't wanna
uncomfortable.
be that way anymore. Yeah, it is, and it's like, I don't want that to keep me from having a meaningful conversation with somebody, maybe bringing something to it that maybe God wants to show them something. Maybe there was something I had to say to this person, maybe there wasn't. Maybe we were just having an amazing conversation. I didn't wanna be closed off to that anymore.
When I was younger, especially in terms of political conversations, I was right, and if you disagreed with me, you were wrong, and it was my job to show you the error of your ways and bring you around to my way of thinking."
Mhm.
That's exhausting.
Yeah.
It's not true. I mean, it's really exhausting when, you are responsible for, getting people thinking the right way.
Mhm.
Um, who wants to listen to someone who is completely unwilling to entertain, to even listen, whether or not they ever agree with you, but to even listen to what the other person thinks? And, like, you're never gonna, have a meaningful conversation that you then go back and think about later and think, "Wow, that was interesting." I mean, it's just like writing in a
Mhm.
way.
Yeah.
"Oh, no, that won't work for my story. I can't do that."
Yeah.
Then it's like, "Oh, maybe that was actually a really good idea."
Yeah.
Letting go of needing to be right has really made my life a lot easier. And I think it's not just that it's made my life easier, but it's made me a more open person, and it's made me, I think, a more pleasant person to be around. And again, not that it's our job in life to be pleasant for other people,
Oh,
but it's
it's
an
hard to
easier.
be around somebody who's constantly just wanting to say, "Oh, well, you're wrong, and this is why." So no one wants
Yeah,
to hang out
yeah.
with that.
Yeah, yeah, and I mean, one of the things I found really interesting when I was in school was the more I studied different faith traditions, the more I found that whatever you believe about God, there are some central ideas that pop up again and again and again,
Mhm.
like doing good works. And
Mhm.
if you aren't so caught up in all the parts of it or the mechanics of this tradition versus this tradition, there's a lot there that's similar.
Mhm. Yeah, and it's a great jumping off point to talk to someone too and say, "Well, hey, what exactly do you believe?" Because someone could be like me where they said, "Oh, I'm a Christian." Okay, well, why? Or, what do you believe? If you had asked me, I don't even know what I would have said back in the day. I know what I would say now, but if you asked me back when I was even in college, I don't think I'd know how to answer that other than what I had been fed my whole life. But was it did that is that what I truly believed? I don't think I would have known. And it
Mhm.
would be the same as talking to someone who says, "Oh, I go to a Catholic church." "Oh, well, what do you believe?" They might not actually believe Catholic doctrine, they just grew up Catholic. And you might learn
Mhm.
something new about them that maybe that's not truly where they believe. And yeah, we can't be so quick to just leave the labels on people when they say, "Oh, this is what I believe," and be so closed-minded to say, "Oh, okay, well, then I'm not talking to you." It's
Yeah.
wrong.
It's our preconceptions of what we think something is. It can be very limiting.
Mhm.
And sometimes, like, somebody believes something and you just know that's not for you.
Yeah,
Somebody makes a suggestion with your writing and you just know that's not going to work for what you're writing. There's that too. So it's just holding those things in tension, I think, as we navigate life.
yeah, yeah, I agree. Well, Anne, this has been a very exciting conversation. I mean, we started off talking about books and we ended up talking about theology, and somehow they both managed to be cohesive and work together in varying ideas of how to live life. I absolutely love when conversations do those kind of things. This is what happens when you reach out and you talk to people and just get to know each other. You don't have to have everything figured out. You don't have to believe the same things. You can have a healthy, meaningful conversation with somebody and leave agreeing to disagree. Maybe you might pick up something new from that person, maybe you won't, but we have to be willing to try.
Mhm.
And that's what makes
Mhm.
us human, that's what makes us relational, and that's what makes life meaningful is meeting new people and seeing where they come from. So, thank you again for being willing to come on and talking with me.
Well, thank you for willing to have me. I never would have thought that writing and theology would dovetail
I
into one
know.
another
Me neither.
so interestingly, and so almost like 2 pieces fitting together
Mhm.
as they have in this conversation. So thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you so much.
Yeah, and if people want to read your books, where can they go to find them?
All my books are on Amazon, and if a person has Kindle Unlimited, they can read them for free.
Okay,
I also have a website, which is amgeever.com.
awesome. Well, thank you again, Anne, for coming on.
Thank you so much.
If this episode inspired you to step out of your comfort zone, I'd love to hear from you. Feel free to leave a comment or a review. You'll find the link in the show notes. Thanks again for joining me today. I look forward to our next conversation.